I'm delighted to have May here. I'd like May to tell us about the Cooper Hewitt. What's it about? How does it work? All of that.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's very nice to be here. I think what's interesting about the Cooper Hewitt and having this conversation at Kendall is that Cooper Hewitt actually started as a collection, very much like the Material Connections lab upstairs at the Cooper Union, which is a university in downtown Manhattan. And the collection itself was about to be dissolved because they had run out of space and they needed more studio space. I'm sure that sounds familiar to the staff from Kendall. But there was a team of people, kind of locals, who wanted to save the collection. It had been a teaching collection started by the Hewitt sisters, who were the granddaughters of Peter Cooper of the great steel and coal fortune. And in order to keep it in New York City, this group of people worked with the Smithsonian to ensure that the collection stayed together as a whole, but it remained in New York City. So we created a partnership with the Smithsonian, and we became the first unit of the Smithsonian to be outside of New York, outside of Washington, D.C., which is why the name is a little unusual. It's the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, but for many years it was just known as the Cooper Hewitt Museum. And I think one of the great things about the collection is that we still see it as education as a major component of the collection and the mission of the museum.
Has there ever been talk of having a part of the Cooper Hewitt in Washington to be sort of more heavily recognized as the National Design Museum?
Well, actually, the charter that we wrote with the Smithsonian requires that the collection has to stay in New York. It has to stay in New York City. And getting into the details a little bit, most of the Smithsonian, if you were to go to Washington, D.C., we don't receive the same amount of funding at the Cooper Hewitt that all the other units do. So it's a slightly different.
Got it.
But we do get to D.C. by traveling our collections to our other colleagues down there.
Oh, nice.
There's a lot of exchange back and forth.
Good. And then there's the National Design Awards. Are you aware of the National Design Awards? Yes, I would think so. It's a fabulous event, and I think you just recently announced
we
the
did
honorees,
just.
right?
This is our 15th year of the awards program, so I've been lucky to work on it for the 15 years that it's been in existence. I managed it for the last 10, but we have just announced all the winners. They're coming from across the United States. I think that this particular program is a little different than most of the other awards programs that are out there because this program is multi-discipline, and also it's not an award that's bestowed by the museum. It's actually bestowed by a jury, which we choose, that the museum chooses each year, and it's a different jury. And the jury is cross-disciplinary as well. So you'll have 10 people. So for instance, this year we had Bruce Mao from Chicago, Tom Kundig. I'm trying to think who else was on the jury. Sorry. But you have people coming from all over the country who may not know that much about the different disciplines. But one of the conversations I've had with many juries over the years is that it's so unusual for them to have an opportunity to jury categories outside of their own particular category. So for instance, last year I was on the ASID national jury, but it was very strictly interiors, and there were only people looking at it from the eye of as interior architects, and they knew each other. They felt that they learned so much, and they had an opportunity to learn from these colleagues that they probably would have never met previously. So that's, it's always this engaging conversation, and you don't have that usually, And also the other thing that's very different about the National Design Awards is that these awards are given for body of work. So it's a lifetime of work. So for instance, this year, the Lifetime Achievement winners are Chermayeff and Geismar. I'm not sure if people are, I'm sure the graphics people know who Chermayeff and Geismar are. But for those of us who grew up sort of in the 70s and the great emergence of logos, we all know CBS and we know Chase Manhattan and the Smithsonian and PBS. They are the arbiters who created all of those logos. And it's been a long time. I've talked to their team a lot, and they've told me that this is the only award they haven't won. I was like, I know, I'm sorry. It's not in my control. But so it's really great for people like them to win. I think this year we really have a group of people who have been acknowledged but haven't won in the awards program. So what's different about this program is that, like any design issue, we kind of looked at it, we created it 15 years ago, but it's changed. We looked at it and said, oh, this isn't quite working out. We need to add a category here. We need to rethink the way people submit. So that's been a little bit different. But in order to really win, you might be nominated 15 years, like Tremaine and Geismar, and not win for 15 years. That's really hard for someone who's that amazing. And, I know Ricky Solwerman is here, and a lot of you are probably going to go hear him speak. Let me tell you, Ricky submitted every year, and he was not happy about it. I'm sure he'll get up on stage and say that tomorrow and be like, I can't believe it took me, 14 years to win. But it did, and so I think that says something about the state of design in the U.S. is that there are these amazing people, and they're coming from it from lots of different ways, but there's lots of different ways to be successful and influence people.
Sure, have the impact. What is the nomination process? Is it? It's not
well,
arbitrary
it's actually used to be closed, but a few years ago we opened it so that anyone can nominate someone to be considered.
Okay.
But then after you're nominated, you actually have to sign on and submit. So it's that transition point of, like, wow, I've been nominated, but like, do I actually want to do all the work to submit? And that's where all the different categories, I think, come into play. People who are in the architecture world are very used to submitting, and often on a larger firm, they'll have someone who is in the marketing team and they're used to doing that. People in landscape and fashion are not used to doing that at all, specifically fashion. That's very different. Usually within the fashion community, if you're going to win an award, let's say from CFDA, it's bestowed. So they say, wow, John is doing amazing work. You are our up-and-coming designer of the year. You win the Coty Award. So if they don't submit more than 1 or 2 years, it's because they don't want to. They're not used to that. So it's kind of interesting. But the submission process, once you've agreed to sign on, you submit basically a book and with 10 projects, and everything gets reviewed by the jury. So every submission that comes in is organized and reviewed by everyone on the jury. So someone from fashion, product, interaction, interiors, architecture, communications. And so one of the things I always say to people who are submitting, and we have a winner actually here. Herman Miller is a former corporate design winner. Probably, maybe you submitted that.
Not tell.
One of the things I say to people is that although your work may be extremely well known within your field, you need to actually educate everyone in the room about who you are. And that might seem very strange, but someone in landscape may have heard of Herman Miller, but they don't know the full extent of the history of the firm and how they have impacted design over the many years that they've been in business.
Because it is the National Design Awards, and I know you have a dinner at the White House, and I think
We have a luncheon, we do.
lady or
Yes.
lunch, all right? I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit. But my real question is, have you seen an influence on design awards within Washington? And I put it that way because I've always tried to get an ear to make the point that National Endowment for the Arts is understood as for the arts, but that's where design is sort of housed. And I'd love to, I've always thought it'd be great to have a Undersecretary of Design in the Department of Commerce or something like that. So my hope is that the design awards are helping Washington and the bureaucracy there understand that design really is pivotal to our economic growth. So I don't know how much those connections are being made.
There are a little bit. I mean, one of the things that people sometimes think is unusual for a museum is that the National Design Awards is actually housed within the Education Department. So in my role at the museum, I was the Deputy Director of Education. And that's because we see the awards not only as an awards program, but a way to educate as many people as possible. And we see it as our largest educational initiative, national and internationally. So as John kind of alluded to, Mrs. Obama and actually all of the First Ladies for the last 15 years have very graciously served as the honorary patron for the awards. And I've worked very closely with the Obama administration, and I have to say that she in particular, I think, is very interested. Now she's extremely busy.
Yeah.
So it's, we're lucky that all of the first ladies have actually hosted a luncheon for the awardees, and about 150 people, and everybody has sort of their different way of doing it, from just a tea to a luncheon. But I have to say the Obamas have been amazing, and we have a beautiful sit-down luncheon where she attends, all the awardees attend, the jurors, and one of the things that was different is about 5 years ago, Mrs. Obama's team called me and said, well, I'll be a patron, but if you do, you have to do something for some kids. So what happened is, as part of our National Design Week in New York City, I run an event called the Teen Design Fair, where we bring in about 300 or 400 New York City public high school students in to do kind of college and career readiness. So what we do is we have about 50 designers sit at tables, and we used to call it speed dating, but I like to use the term minute mentoring now, where they really talk to them about different career opportunities. And we also seed the room with admissions and financial aid officers from colleges from around the country. And we spend about an hour and a half doing that. And then we go in and, for the last 10 years, we've been very lucky. Tim Gunn has actually served as our keynote and talked to the students about what it means to go on to study art and design, because he was the former assistant dean of admissions at Parsons before he became the chairman of fashion at Parsons. So we do that program, but what happened is I do that in DC, or we do it in DC. So as we do that, we get another 400, so we doubled the number of students that we're hitting, right? So now we do another 400 in DC. And then from that group of students, we take 15 of those students to the luncheon at the White House. So that's kind of its amazing moment where I feel like, when you do that, I bring these kids in, I have their, we're in the red room usually. The first lady comes in, I introduce her to all the students. And then she goes, wow, who am I having lunch with? And I get to say to one of these students, I go, well, actually, you're having lunch with William. And they usually are stunned, because I don't tell them before they go in, because otherwise they're too nervous. And it's hard enough, you have full French service. They're like, how do I eat lunch? And what do you mean I have to eat scallops? I've never had that before. So it's, this is kind of a great moment. But because of her interest in education and serving people, and making sure that when we have this special event at the White House, it's not just for the winners, but it's really to educate people. I think that's where there's a level of interest. Now, how we move that beyond the White House, that's the trick, right? So we need to have, I think, more of those conversations. And I think at the museum, the difference that's happened in the last 5 years is that we've really taken our title of National Design Museum more seriously, and have been looking for ways to both affect change around design nationally and internationally.
That is fantastic. I did not know of that program with the kids. That is
it's
really,
a great
cool
program, and you bring 15 kids to the White House. It's like we were a couple of us looked at each other like, we're done. We don't really have to do anything else anymore. It's good. We just changed 15 lives. That's good.
Absolutely. That is life-changing. That's fabulous.
It's amazing.
Which is a very nice segue to get into talking about the K-12 design education program that you have worked on. And you've heard that's important to Grand Rapids. There's certainly the beginnings, but a serious beginning with a lot of energy around it. So talk a little bit about your experiences in Manhattan.
Well, I think Dale's already, you're done. You don't really need me.
No, we do.
Well, the one thing I would say is that my experience really is in the informal learning place, right? I'm coming from a place of a museum. Right. So how many formal educators do we have? How many people in here have trained in education? Raise your hand. 1, 2, right? So that's from my gut, this is really my personal opinion, is that in order for that to be successful, in order to bring design thinking or the idea of design within any formal learning environment, is that we have to make sure we partner with our colleagues in formal education, right? I'm not a teacher. I I get to be the guest lecturer a lot of times. I get to come in and run a workshop and be like the fun person that like, oh, that cool lady gets to do this for a while. But I don't have to deal with all the issues of all the map testing. I don't have to make sure that I hit all the Common Core requirements. I don't have to deal with security getting into the classroom. There's all these like components that I think that are very tricky that we need to really address carefully. And for me, I think that design thinking is very special. I'm sure you've heard, the idea of going from STEM to STEAM to STEAMed, which is, adding art and adding design to the concept of STEM education, which I think is really important. But how do you make sure that the idea of design thinking, which I think really has the ability to blend the combination of both science, all the STEAM requirements, but bringing in a creative, unique way, how do you do that so it's part of the curriculum and that it's not an add-on, right? Because the last thing you want to do is go into a really crazy, busy school and say, like, I have this great solution for you. It's right here. It's called design. And the teacher's like, great. Like, how's that going to help me? So that for us, that's been the way that we've really approached it, both dealing with teachers when we do professional development for them, as well as doing work in the K through 12 schools. Then the way we've done that in New York City is we were asked a few years ago, our department, to develop some work around our collections. Right. But at the time, our colleagues in curatorial had not digitized the collections. So we needed to find a way to get that out there. So what we did is we said, okay, so you're not ready, but we still need to move ahead. So we used the concepts of design thinking and problem solving to go into the New York City public school system. Oh. So that's kind of how we approached it. And now since the museum is close for renovation, we've still been able to use that. And we issue challenges, not unlike the challenges I think that you guys did this morning of, how might you do this or how might you do that? So a lot of times when we go into public schools, it's based around a current exhibition. Okay. But if there's not, then we would do it around something that is community-based. There's a lot of really interesting research that's been done specifically on the young audience of 13 to 18 about areas of interest, and their areas of interest are sustainability, community, design. And so we would try to base those questions around those themes. And then we would, alter it for the different segments if we were going into elementary versus middle or high school. And so we've been very successful. When we had kids come into the museum, and in New York City, it's different. You think like, oh, it's easy. You just hop on public transport and get to a museum, which is true. But a lot of the schools can't afford to either have a school bus or take the time to go in for a field trip. So you want to be that one field trip that they take a year. And we were probably getting like 9,000 students, in a year, which might be a lot here. I don't know, but in New York, it's not, right? Because the DOE there has 1 million students. So what we did when the museum closed is we said, let's take our design thinking workshops, which we call Design in the Classroom, out to the schools. And so we went from 9,000 to 16,000 the next year. And I know between September and January this year, we'd already booked 25,000 students. So there's definitely a demand, but it was for us turning it on its head. I'm looking at Dale because he probably knows all these issues of like going into the classroom and bringing the work there. But then that kind of seeds the environment. We were worried at first that it would be a moment where, they did this workshop and they weren't interested. Right. But what we found is that we would have whole schools that would want to do it. So I might go out to Queens and do K through 5 for an entire school. And that means, taking on a team of 20 to 30 people and just running it all day or running workshops all week. But it's a little bit slimmer than, I know you guys did something that was like 3 or 4 hours. We would do something that was really one class period.
Would you involve the local design community in that process, or educating the educators, or how did that work?
In the professional development arena, we definitely do. And usually our professional development training for educators is about a week long.
Okay.
So we introduce them to the concepts of design thinking, and we bring in professional designers to talk about what it is to solve the problems and how to identify the challenges.
Right.
But with the students, we actually would bring in trained educators that we had trained at the museum. And the reason why we did that is, and I don't know how it is here, but in New York, it's very difficult to get somebody into a public school. So for us, if they were working for the museum, they had to go through a federal background check. So the schools automatically let them come in because they were approved by the museum.
I'm going to look at Dale on this one, but I think we're in the learning curve on that one.
Well, it depends. I mean, I think that's also building that relationship with it's the Grand Rapids public school system. And it took us years to build that relationship with the DOE because, as you mentioned, design doesn't fall within any of the curriculum points. It doesn't in the New York City curriculum point either. It's within art, it's as a benchmark, but it's only the principles of design. It's not the concept of design. So we've been working really for probably 8 years to get them to understand that difference. And I think we are there now to the point where they're asking us to come on committees, and we're working on a very large research project with the New York City Department of Education, looking at how art can affect different curriculum points.
We, of course, want to take advantage of that experience so the learning curve can be shorter here in West Michigan. And because there has to be really a lot of heuristic opportunities going on through there. What advice would you have for a school system that has interest and wants to make a difference? How does that work? Do you need a catalytic group like the Cooper Hewitt? Do you need the beginning, the seeding that's going on with Dale and the public school system and Kendall and other universities around? Is there a critical mass, or do you need a couple of spearheads? Or
it's interesting. I think there are a couple of different things that are happening right now. If you went the Cooper Hewitt model, we do it from the back end. We do the professional development, so we would come in and train teachers from that end, and we build coalition with the actual school district. And I think that's really the most important part. Sort of like I was mentioning earlier, if you don't have buy-in from the top down from the school district, I don't think that you will be successful, right? So you need to make sure that the superintendent and the district leadership really understands how design thinking can help address the different curriculum points. And I hate to say this, but it will help with testing, right? It helps with Common Core requirements because those are their standards that they need to meet. So I think it's just showing proof that it can be of assistance rather than just being something else that you have to do.
have you found that the business community, so I don't know how this works in New York at all, but has the business community been interested in supporting that kind of idea? And the reason I ask it, at least it's my understanding of the folks I interact with, that the business community around here is very interested in talent development. So it can almost be a pull-through kind of thing. At least I'd like to think that was true.
I can get that sense of that when I talk to people in the Grand Rapids area. I think that you have something here it's really kind of juicy because you guys know each other, you're willing to work together, you're willing to have that conversation. You've got a really strong school here that you can partner with. It's almost like it's like New York City is Sisyphus. You're like constantly trying to like get something done and you can't because there's too many rules and regulations that you're trying to get through either the DOE or different components. I think you actually have a wonderful opportunity here because people are willing to partner and have that conversation. And I think that you can kind of just work together and find that. I find less that the business leaders are willing to have that conversation. I think design might be more royalty in Western Michigan than it is in New York. Not that it isn't royalty in New York, but finance is king in New York City. So in order for there to get really positive business movement, it would have to be through the finance community in New York City.
Here it would be through manufacturing.
Right. So it's just like a different perspective. And I think people coming from manufacturing, understand the importance of design more so than people within the finance community.
I think that's probably true. Yeah, and I know a lot of you know the name George Arachek and economic forecasting. If you haven't seen a recent article in MyBiz, he actually makes the statement that he thinks design is more important to the future of Michigan than engineers, which is probably going to cause some sort of attack on him by the engineers, but I love the fact that he says that.
It's great.
So it's very good stuff. Well, you mentioned a little bit about West Michigan. What has been your exposure to and experience with the design community around here?
Mostly you.
Good. Good.
Well, I've been lucky to work with a few people at Herman Miller and Steelcase and coalesce a little bit, and I know that Wolverine's here as well. So I know people, like I'm meeting people. But I find that again, like it's interesting. I meet with people in New York City. They're here. I think that people are kind of going out and exploring and seeing what they can do here. And of course, I worked with Reed when he was at Cranbrook and before he was at Cranbrook.
Right.
So.
It's totally a setup question, of course, because
Well, I think everyone knows.
the point that I would make and have made to May over a few years is that one of the advantages of West Michigan is it is a collaborative community, and that you can indeed get designers of different disciplines together. You can get design representatives from different, even competitive companies together, and they are actually able to make some things happen by collectively being interested in moving some ideas forward. So that so impressed May that she has decided to move to Grand Rapids, and actually it's true. May is indeed going to become a resident here in Grand Rapids, and I am extremely excited about that, and she can explain a little bit more about it, but I'm wanting to do everything I can to expose her to as much of the design community as possible, so she can both help bring what her experiences have been here and continue to make sort of the connections that are useful to all of that. So I'm going to let her talk a little bit about that, but I want you to be thinking about questions you might want to ask May, because we're just about coming up to that time. So welcome to Grand Rapids, May.
Thank you. It's true. I already bought a house. It's in East, sorry. But I have my husband and my two young boys. We were moving here. My husband took a job in the medical community at Mary Free Bed, but he did study design at Pratt. So he understands. And I'm looking forward to meeting everyone in the community and seeing how I can work with people. And it sounds like there's lots of really great stuff going on. And
there is a lot of good stuff, and I'm going to do everything I can to have you meet everybody I possibly can help make happen, and a lot of the people in the room here. So what questions might you have of me?
Okay, I'm going to say one thing. You did ask about how professional designers work with.
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily work with professional designers in the front of, in the K through 12 environment so much sometimes, but we actually, over the last 20 years, have developed a really rigorous college and career readiness program at the museum called, it's called Design Scholars now. And that's an opportunity where we work with professional designers doing studio visits and workshops and in-depth projects with high school age students to prepare them for college. So it's giving them an insight into what different careers look like, what it's like to work in the design environment, and then also if you become, it's a 3-tier program starting with the fair, yep, and then moving on to different things like studio visits and workshops, and then the final tier is a select group of students who actually get internships, paid internships with professional designers in New York City.
And these are high school kids.
High school students. And I recently had an architect tell me that the high school student was better than his college interns. So
there's a neat idea that somewhere between Kendall, the Grand Rapids Public Museum, and Design West Michigan, that's a very, very interesting idea.
Yeah, it's a great program. I have to, and that is a way to really build the issue. The program actually started because AIGA about, I want to say 20 years ago, actually had a conference called Why is Graphic Design 99% White? And I think that if we look in the room and we look nationally, the design community does not necessarily reflect the diversity and demographics that are coming down the pike.
Yeah.
And I think that that is an issue because if we are designing for certain personas, you would like the designers to reflect who they're designing for, at least somewhat, or at least have that voice in the room. And that is actually a very important role of what we do.
Yeah.
And what we found from that critical mass of developing these young high school students, that pool of students is now being seen as one of the most diverse groups of students truly interested in careers in design and are now being cherry-picked from colleges from around the country.
That is very cool.
It's interesting. I mean, it's taken a long time, but I think we have a really great model, and it's a fantastic program.
That is, and it is a great model. And that's what I'm hopeful we can learn from and take advantage of, basically. I think the last statistics I heard, I think our Hispanic population is around 37%, but there are not too many Hispanic designers in the room. So
It's not an issue necessarily. It's a national issue.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, I realize, yeah.
it's even if you went back to the National Design Awards, that's an issue that we have too, and we have that conversation of how do you, you don't want to limit who you give the awards to, but also you don't necessarily want it to all be a homogeneous group, which sometimes it is.
No, and you want it to be inspirational to others. Yeah, absolutely. Could I have a couple of people pick up some mics down here so that if somebody has a question, and I think Catherine's raised her hand, you can hand off a mic to them.
Considering the last 15 years and what you've done there at the Cooper Hewitt and thinking about education both in New York City and nationally, you've told us a little bit about what you've accomplished so far. What do you think that the challenges are in the next 15 years for the Cooper Hewitt relative to its role in the nation, and also for other institutions that want to impact business and the society with design principles? What do you think the biggest challenges are? Kind of near term, the next 15 years.
Well, I think that there's two points of that, right? Like, because you're a museum, so you still have your museum and you have your collections. And so I think the museum world is struggling with the fact that museum visitorship sometimes is going down, right? So it's about building that museum visitorship and educating people about what it means to be at a museum on site, but then also taking all the content knowledge you have and finding ways to share it virtually. So it's kind of this odd two-tiered issue that they're having. And I see that a lot of organizations that are trying to develop content and share it are often struggling with that issue as well, especially if you're trying to go beyond a community, a actual set community, because a lot of museums are seen as community, places of community. I think I can say this pretty without, because I've been told this, is that of all the units for the Smithsonian, we call each individual research center or museum a unit. Our unit probably reaches more people nationally than the other units, not from visitorships coming in, but us going out. So we do a lot of research at looking at how people, how you reach people. And although we're in New York, we have the best relationship with the DC public school system of all the units in DC. And I was kind of joking with an undersecretary about that. She's like, "Oh, actually, I think you're right." So to me, it's about education and taking your mission and making sure that you can get it out to different people and making sure that people understand that the mission is not, just coming in and seeing the collections, as wonderful that is, but how can you make that collection relevant? I had one of the high school students I worked with once. He's like, this is all cool, but you guys are giving me all this information. He's like, I don't really care about the information. He's like, I want inspiration. And I was like, okay, that's great. There's so much information that we have available to us now, especially everyone who's in, a digital native. how do you actually take that content and that experience and make it relevant and inspirational to people, right? Because we have so much stuff that we're competing with, you know? Do you want to go to a museum, or would you rather go to the movies, or do paintball, or, you know, do zip line? That's the conversation I have at home. You know, luckily I have two little people who are pretty invested in going to museums, but that's not necessarily the case with a lot of places, you know. I think most people, and Dale, you probably know these stats better than me, you go to a museum up until the age of 10 because that's what you do in school, and then you don't go again until you're 30. So what do you do between 10 and 30? So I think that's actually a huge challenge for the Cooper Hewitt, to make sure that we're engaging and relevant. And with the reopening of the museum later this year, we're doing a lot of things to try and make it a more engaging and unique place. One of the things that you mentioned was the process lab. So we're trying to make, you know, and I think actually there's a conference going on right now about urban environments. I think Dr. Rosen is attending it. And I think one of I saw on their website, there's actually a webinar about maker spaces, and it's about creating that. I mean, like, how do people learn? Do you learn by just going and looking at an object and reading a didactic panel? Or do you go in and you want to experience something and make that a really engaging, unique experience? And how do you do that? And I think that that's a challenge that lots of different organizations have, not just the Cooper Hewitt. I don't know if I answered your question. But we can talk New York if you want to.
The other thing, Catherine, on your question, one of the things that I've discovered, I think this fits what's going to happen in the next 15 years, is I've tried to get a handle on how many designers are in the state of Michigan. There aren't any databases that exist that allow you to know that, because the SIC codes and the things that create all the databases that people pull on about the demographics, if you're a designer working, well, for Gary at Herman Miller, you don't appear as a designer. You appear as a level of management within a furniture manufacturing sector. So there's something very inconsistent about that. That's how I got to know George Arachek, because I was trying to get all that data. He couldn't get it either. So I think is that understanding that there has to be a different set of metrics and data points that acknowledge the influence of this kind of intangible profession called design and all the disciplines. As that changes, I think that'll change a lot. There's a database effort there. Gary's right behind you, and he's responding with his hand up. So,
go ahead, Catherine.
Right.
If you want to ask a follow-up.
Sure. Can somebody get her a microphone, please?
Not to usurp your time, Gary, but as somebody who's spent my whole life and profession as a design manager, often they ask you on these sorting features on whatever you're signing up for, what is your occupation? Design manager is never there. So I think it's about language, and museums like the Cooper Hewitt or Dell's programming, we talk about semantics and language and the importance of meaning. We have to develop the language among ourselves and in these things that we design to establish those kind of categories so that the conversation can even begin, so that we can begin to measure what you're looking for.
Thank you. Gary Smith from Herman Miller. First to Dale and to you, does education and inspiration came up in both of your conversations, and I'm really excited to hear about your grant. And what I'm thinking about is when you talk to some of Miller's great designers, they always have this embedded curiosity about the world. And when you think about, I've always been impressed with Kendall, because you can go in and you can see the joinery, you can see the scrape marks on the furniture, you understand that it was made of something by a hand or a machine. And this practical application from theoretical to experiential, and that we don't think of it as design so much as intellectual provocation. And so when somebody was thinking about the creation of new human experience through the things that we create, the forms, whether you're creating comfort or beauty or whatever it is, I wonder about in the educational curriculum, whether it's primary or late primary, whether the curriculum becomes manifested in experience, squishing clay, scraping wood, cutting foam core, those kinds of things, or whether it stays in a quasi-theoretical, it's about design and about the process, but the kids don't touch anything. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about about that, and whether that kind of experience, Dale, either in your week immersion or in the Cooper Hewitt's educational efforts, how we get kids to experience that they actually can create.
Well, for us, when we go into the classroom, it's a little bit of a lecture and, like 10 minutes, just, a quick 10-minute thing. But then we actually present them with challenges and talk to them about what design is and what it could be and what it could result in. And then we actually give them materials to work with so that they then have to prototype something based on the challenge, and they have to work in groups, and then they have to present. And the reason why we do that is, for those of you who work in education, you know that part of the Common Core requirements are that you need to work in groups, and you have to do presentation skills. And those are hard things to accommodate within just general curriculum. So in that way, we're helping the educators address two areas. They're developing problem-solving skills, which is another Common Core area. They're working in groups, and they're doing presentations. And then they're also, luckily, working with materials. And we just give them very inexpensive things that we provide to the schools. And I believe, there's lots of different modes of learning, Project Zero. So that hands-on moment, I think, is very important for some of the students. For some of the students, not so much, but I think it's great for someone who doesn't necessarily learn that way to see the importance of that. And I don't find any problem with students doing that, probably up into 6th grade, but then at 6th grade, 5th or 6th grade, they're like, I'm too cool for school, I'm not doing that. I think someone said that they were in a high school and it was a little bit challenging this morning. And, you get into that problem. But the real issue is when you're dealing with adults and they don't want to touch the pipe cleaners because that's beneath them. But, unless they're designers and they're willing to do, and they do very elaborate prototypes. But I'm all for it. I think that that's important to help you understand. And then we kind of work them through that and say okay, this is what you created, but how could you improve it? And we do that with the teachers as well. And we ask them to develop challenges and curriculum planning around design. But they have to do all the same model making and prototyping and development that their students would have to do.
Another question over there?
Hi, my name is Sheila Garner, and I'm not a designer, but this is really exciting for me, and I would have to say inspiring. And based on what you said about getting students actively involved, I'm not sure if everyone knows about this, but hopefully you've heard that Grand Valley just ran their first ever West Michigan Challenge, and that's where the students created their prototypes, and they won all kinds of, they had to present. They won all kinds of awards that included large, cash awards. And I'm just wondering if there's a chance for all the right parties to meet and collaborate and bring something like that maybe down to a high school level or something like that. But it's the first ever, so it's just starting. And it would be exciting if we could do that. So.
Cool, good.
Yeah, it sounds great.
I think it's all about collaboration, for sure. Any more questions?
I had a follow-up question regarding metrics and data.
Okay.
This was a little bit earlier in the questions this evening. But being a facilitator of this morning's workshops, I'm presented with the challenge of how to collect all that information and how to compile it into something relevant so that we can use it as sort of a platform reference moving forward as multidisciplines are coming together and wanting to integrate more and more of these types of activities. Do you have any suggestions for how to go about that process?
To be really honest, I think that the most important, for us, the most important way that we've done that is we've used an official outside evaluation team. So the team that I've been working with for the last 8 years is Macro International, which is based out of Washington, D.C. It's a big evaluation firm. They do things like they go in and evaluate countries. But we have a vice president there who's very interested in design, and she feels that there can be some impact and change. So what we do is we follow those teachers who come with us and do professional development for a week, and then we kind of look at where they are coming in. we track where they are at the end of the week, and then we work with them for the entire year. So when we say professional development, I really mean professional development for a full year. They have to write lesson plans for us. They have to engage in a community network. And we actually go to the schools and then do testing in the schools of how the students are at the beginning of the year, their design knowledge, and the end of the year. That's what we've been doing at the museum. But the most intense, there's a book, I forget the name of it, I'm sorry. There was a book published by the NEA, and it was co-written by Peter Hall and Meredith Davis about design education and design thinking, probably about 15, 20 years ago. And Meredith is really still in the world looking at how design can impact at the teaching level. But I think she would say that the Cooper Hewitt is now doing the most work at looking at the K through 12, environment. Mm-hmm. And so we actually we got a grant to work with a school in South Texas where we worked with the entire 9th grade class for a year. And we split the class, and we gave half of them design thinking training and the other half not. Mm-hmm. But the results that we got from our professional evaluator, and I think this is the key, is that a professional outside evaluator could look at all that data, and she helped us create the surveys as well. We actually showed that the students who had the design thinking training did better in English and science compared to the other students. And that was the first piece of data that was actually produced in probably 15 years that actually looked at that. Now, we haven't had the funds to do that again, but that would be a great way to maybe work together. Maybe we could, take that evaluation segment and repeat it here in Grand Rapids.
Boy, do I love that idea. We're going to talk more about that one. Okay. One of the things I'm a believer.
Seeing Meredith on Thursday.
Yeah, well, I'm a believer that it's easier to put feasibility into an exciting idea than it is to put excitement into a feasible idea, and I would like to believe that with that kind of process. So thank you for sharing that. We should find a way to help get that going around here. Find the funding for it, because boy, is that key.
No, it's great. I mean, because
really
again,
key.
that kind of goes back to the whole component. You have to validate what we're doing in order for there to be movement. Yep. It was interesting because, we had a colleague who very much wanted us to, infuse design in the national curriculum, and they didn't quite understand that there is no national curriculum, and they kept arguing with me, and they're like, well, you're not doing your job because this should be the national curriculum. I go, my job's not to create a national curriculum. I go, if there was one, I would. But, it was, educating people to let them know that, it's state by state. So that's where it's complicated in understanding, those points. But, again, we're working with the CCSSO, the Chief State School Council officers, to try and educate them about design. So we do a lot of, friend making and conversations that you do too. And what I find is interesting is that people are coming to us now, not only just nationally, but internationally. So I actually think it might be easier to work in Singapore than it is to work some places in the U.S. Why? Because they know that they have to do something in their curriculum, which is a national curriculum, because if they don't, it's going to affect them down the road in 20 years. They know they're testing very high, they're doing extremely well, but if they look at the innovation point, they're down at the bottom. And so I just got back from a week and a half of teaching there, and that was the whole component. How to build in innovation around programming through cultural organizations to help them be more creative in pre-K through 12th grade. So.
Boy, do I want to talk more about that one. And when you're here in town, we can have coffee at Madcap and have those kind of discussions. So one more question, and then we're going to end it up.
I was wondering, with your personal career, if you're going to continue your work with the museum when you're here in Grand Rapids. Are you looking for something else, and will it be with John or something in education? Or
if you ask John, I'm working for John.
But are you continuing your position with the museum?
I'm not going to continue my position there. I actually resigned because it's a federal position, and you know, people just, it's time to let someone else take that on. But I have a great colleague named Vasiliki Giannopoulos, who's now running the National Design Awards. She was my intern, and I trained her for the last 2 years, and now she's running the awards program, and they're in the process of hiring someone else to take on the other projects that I've done. They're dividing my work over 4 people. So there you go. So now, right now, I'm being a mom.
Very good.
So,
But you bring your influences here and can be able to help us achieve even more in this area.
I'd love to.
it's
So
good.
I'm looking forward to that.
I very much want to thank Progressive AE and the Grand Rapids Public Museum for co-sponsoring and the reception downstairs. And there is a little more food left if you all want to go down and partake a little bit more. So May, thank you. Welcome to Grand Rapids, and we're delighted you're here.
Thank you.